The morning sun reflected off the glass towers of Sterling Enterprises, a symbol of power, success, and everything that Michael Sterling had built from the ground up. Inside those walls, people whispered his name with equal parts admiration and fear. He was the kind of CEO who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. Yet beneath his polished suit and relentless drive, there lingered an ache, the kind that no amount of money or achievement could numb. It had been 5 years since his wife's passing, 5 years of raising his little daughter, Emma, alone. She was his only light in a life otherwise consumed by work and loneliness. But on that particular morning, fate was about to blur the lines between power and humility in ways no one could have predicted. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of compassion to change lives, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us tell more stories that touch the heart and remind us of what truly matters. Down in the basement level of Sterling Enterprises, the janitor's room smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old mop water. Inside, a man named Daniel worked silently, his weathered hands gripping a broom like an old friend. He was a man who moved through life unseen, polite, quiet, and invisible to the corporate world above him. Few knew that years ago, he had been something else entirely, a paramedic who once saved lives every day. But after a tragic accident that took his wife and unborn child, Daniel couldn't bring himself to face hospitals, sirens, or stretchers again. He'd walked away from it all, taking a janitorial job just to survive, to stay somewhere far from the noise of memories. Upstairs, Michael's daughter Emma was skipping along the marble floors, holding a pink teddy bear in her hand. Everyone in the building adored her, the sweet girl with golden curls and curious eyes. She often followed her father to work since he hated leaving her alone at home. The office staff smiled and waved as she passed, her laughter echoing like sunlight through the sterile halls. But that laughter suddenly stopped. It happened near the break room just after Michael had stepped into a board meeting. Emma's nanny, Clara, had been waiting nearby, sipping coffee and scrolling her phone. Emma tugged at her arm, asking if she could get a snack from the vending machine. Clara smiled distractedly and nodded, but moments later the nanny's smile froze. Her face went pale. She dropped her phone, clutching her chest. Her body trembled, and before Emma could even understand, Clara collapsed on the floor. "Mom's not moving!" Emma screamed, tears filling her wide eyes. She didn't know what to do. She only knew that someone had to help. People stared from afar, frozen in shock, whispering, unsure. Executives in tailored suits hesitated, not knowing how to react. Then, out of nowhere, the janitor appeared. Daniel had been mopping a hallway nearby when he heard the child's desperate cry. Instinct took over. The mop clattered to the ground as he sprinted toward the sound. When he saw Clara on the floor, her breathing shallow, her skin pale, his old training surged back to life. "Call 911!" he shouted to no one in particular, already kneeling beside her. The crowd around him backed away as he checked for a pulse. It was faint. Her breathing was erratic. Without hesitation, Daniel began CPR, pressing his hands rhythmically on her chest, counting under his breath. The office floor, once silent, now echoed with the sound of urgency, the sound of one man fighting time itself. Emma stood close by, sobbing uncontrollably. Daniel paused just long enough to look up and whisper, "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. I promise." Then he kept going. He didn't care who was watching, CEO or janitor. Life was life. The paramedics arrived minutes later, but to everyone, those minutes felt like hours. When they took over, Daniel stepped back, sweat dripping from his forehead, his hands trembling slightly from both exertion and memory. He hadn't done CPR since that terrible night years ago when he failed to save his own wife. But this time the story was different. This time, the faint rise of Clara's chest meant something. Hope. By the time Michael arrived, his heart pounding, he found his daughter in the arms of a nurse, her face buried in tears. He turned to see the paramedics loading Clara onto a stretcher, her pulse returning, color slowly creeping back into her face. And beside them stood Daniel, his uniform damp, his eyes distant. "Who did this?" Michael demanded, still in shock. One of the paramedics gestured toward Daniel. "He saved her life. If it weren't for him, she might not have made it." The CEO turned, truly seeing the janitor for the first time. He wanted to speak, to thank him, but Daniel simply nodded and walked away, picking up his mop again as if nothing had happened. Over the next few days, word spread through Sterling Enterprises like wildfire. The story of the humble janitor who saved someone's life, and not just anyone, but the CEO's own daughter's nanny, became the talk of every corridor. Michael couldn't shake it from his mind. He called Daniel into his office a week later. The janitor hesitated before entering, hat in hand, unsure what to expect. Michael stood by the window, looking out over the skyline. "You saved someone very dear to me," he began. "My daughter. She hasn't stopped talking about you." Daniel smiled softly, his voice quiet. "I just did what anyone would have done, sir." "Not everyone would have," Michael replied, turning to face him. "You did, and I owe you more than I can ever repay." But Daniel didn't want repayment. "I'm just glad she's okay," he said. "That's enough for me." Something about the humility in those words hit Michael hard. For years, he'd measured success in numbers and profit margins, but standing before this man, a janitor who once wore a paramedic's badge, he saw a kind of greatness that no money could buy. In the days that followed, Michael found himself thinking about Daniel constantly. He asked HR for his file and was shocked to learn the details of his past, the loss, the grief, the years of quiet resilience. He learned that Daniel worked overtime shifts just to afford a small apartment and donate part of his paycheck to a local orphanage. The revelation changed something in Michael. He realized how disconnected he'd become from humanity, from compassion, from gratitude, from life itself. His wife's death had closed him off, turned him into a machine of success. But Daniel's act reignited something long buried: faith in people, faith in purpose. Weeks later, Michael invited Daniel to lunch at the company cafeteria. The janitor tried to decline, saying he didn't belong in the CEO's circle, but Michael insisted. As they sat together, the entire staff watched in quiet disbelief. The powerful CEO eating beside the janitor who saved a life. It was a sight that silenced gossip and inspired admiration. During that meal, Daniel shared stories of his past, how he once rushed through the night saving lives, how he'd lost the courage to continue after losing his family. "Sometimes," he said, staring into his cup of coffee, "life takes everything away from you just to see if you'll still choose to help someone else." Michael felt his throat tighten. "You did," he said. "And maybe that's what this company, what I, needed to be reminded of." That day marked a turning point. Michael began transforming Sterling Enterprises from the inside out. He launched an emergency training program for all employees, ensuring everyone knew how to respond in crises. He started a foundation in memory of his late wife, one that helped low-income workers and supported first responders struggling with trauma. And he promoted Daniel, making him the head of the new safety initiative. For Daniel, it was more than a promotion. It was redemption, a second chance to use his gift to find purpose again. He began mentoring others, teaching them CPR, emergency care, and the importance of compassion in every moment. Employees who once ignored him now sought his guidance, eager to learn not just skills but strength. Months passed, and the atmosphere in the building changed. It wasn't just about deadlines anymore. There was warmth, unity, humanity. Every time Emma visited, she would run to Daniel, calling him Uncle Dan, her laughter echoing through the halls again, a sound that made both men smile. One afternoon, Michael stood at his office window watching Daniel lead a training session below. He thought about how one act of kindness, one decision to help, had changed so many lives. And for the first time in years, he whispered a quiet thank you to the heavens for sending a janitor to save not just a life, but a soul. As Clara fully recovered and returned to work, she often joined Daniel in volunteering at community centers, helping others learn life-saving skills. The two of them, bound by fate and gratitude, became symbols of hope throughout the company. Life has a strange way of revealing its truths. Sometimes the ones who seem invisible are the ones carrying the greatest light. And sometimes all it takes is a moment of courage to remind us that compassion is the true measure of greatness. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, and help us keep sharing stories that restore faith in humanity. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Daniel's place? Would you have stepped forward? Because sometimes it's not about who you are in the world. It's about who you choose to be when the world is watching.